Do you remember when back in 2.7, I figured it out that each Chrysos heir is a combo of gods and heroes, which turned out to be how they're demigods and all, and I was stumped on the heroic inspirations of Tribbie because of the lack of information at the time? Well, with the reveal of her backstory in the 3.0 quest, I figured it out now. But first, before we find the final answer, we need to take a closer look at her past, how she received the prophecy, and ask ourselves, Tribbie, what do you want? 1,000 years ago, there existed a city named Janusopolis, known for its prophetic holy maidens and the temple of three fates. Under the guidance of the three fates, Tantalon, Janus, and Oronyx, Janusopolis' chosen holy maidens could enter a trance and foresee the future, leading people and cities away from disasters. However, according to records of repentance and on the truth of prophecies, over time, the human governing system at Janusopolis became corrupted. Because the holy maidens don't always give good news, people were displeased. As a result, the priests in the temple began to tamper with the prophecy, drugging the holy maidens for them to stay obedient, drugging the customers with hallucinogens to fake the prophecies, preparing fake scripts for them to read aloud to the public, killing investigators who tried to bust their scheme, selecting only meek and powerless people as holy maidens, and grooming them to be birds in a cage. Because of this, the tourism industry of Janusopolis boomed, bringing in countless riches to Janusopolis ruling elites, albeit at the cost of the destitute scammed out of their money and the lives of the imprisoned holy maidens. However, things did not go as planned forever. One day, the most talented holy maiden with a censored name received the prophecy of the black tides. There was a ceremony in which the censored girl seemed to have lost her mind and started screaming in insanity. The abyss is opening its jaws. The holy city will be devoured in black water. Digressing, but I heavily suspect this girl to be Mortis, Tribios' mother, for parallelism reasons. As Mortis was the one who actually received the Chrysos heir prophecy from Kephale to supposedly address the black tide issue, it does make sense for her to be the one who first received the black tide prophecy as well. Anyway, unfortunately, she was not believed back then, for the priests had got used to blasphemy to the point that they forgot actual prophecies existed. Because, Janus, Oronyx, and Tantalon were still around back then. Predictably, when the black tides came, who could have foreseen a prophecy literally screamed to them by the holy maidens? They had tried nothing and they were all out of ideas. As the black tide closed in on the unnamed author of Record of Repentance, who was one of the priests who jailed the holy maidens and actively participated in the scam, he wrote, "The terrifying black tide is growing ever closer. Though no one can see it, it is as clear as day in my pupils. I don't know why, but I feel a sense of calmness. Perhaps this is my final prophecy. After destruction, a new truth will be reborn." But before they died to the black tides and gained repentance, the priests at Janusopolis had done worse, much worse, to Tribbie and her mother, Mortis. Tribbie was born as Tribios, whose name means 3 lives. She was the daughter of Mortis, which is Latin for death and incidentally is etymologically the same as Mors, the Latin name for Thanatos. Mortis had a very apt name. As the previous high priest and oracle maiden, she had power in only names. In reality, Mortis and her daughter, Tribios, were jailed 24/7 by Danelio and his followers in a small room in the temple. According to Saffron's secret recipes, under heavy surveillance, the rose myrtle Mortis could do nothing but to be puppeted by Danelion until she started to amass actual supporters among the rank of the temple. Unfortunately for her, Danelion and co-conspirator Wincombe discovered this ploy and organized her death during one of the rituals. Initially, they wanted to kill the Saffron Tribios too, but Codex the Acolyte was extremely insistent on raising her to become the next sacred tree. Saffron's secret recipes went on. As for her identity as the daughter of Rose Myrtle, she is still young and has not yet grown wings. If we can just keep her grounded, the power of the divine oracle will remain tightly in our grasp. We both know that the saffron's most outstanding property is that it can be cooked in so many ways, put in porridge, stewed, or fried. No matter how you cook it, this plant will always be a delicacy. It is from here on that things started to get strange. In the main quest, we were shown in Tribbie's flashback that her mother actually knew about the plot. She went into the ritual willing to die, asking Tribbie to sleep a little longer past the night. Just sleep through the night, until morning comes, until the next time Aglaea the Sky Titan opens their eyes, because this ritual might take a long time. Tomorrow, my sweet child. I'll be back tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the next tomorrow. If not the tomorrow after that. But if I still haven't returned for a very long time, that means the ritual has succeeded. It means I've found a way to chase away the black tide and reach the new world on the other side. But for various reasons, I can't return to bring my sweet girl with me. But I'll be waiting for you there. As long as you stay brave and kind, we'll meet again in that new world. It's the end of the West Wind, the black tide's other shore, a radiant sea of flowers blessed and protected by the gods. In the rosy horizon, you'll see a silver-white shoal. It marks the end of your voyage, a haven free from storms, cold, and heavy rains. No sorrow can linger there. That is where I'll be waiting for you. So what we can deduce here is that Mortis actually knew about Elysian and Wincombe's plot to kill her all along. Before her death, she even asked the Acolyte, who also appeared in Elysian's letter, to build a secret escape passage and to take care of Tribios. However, she chose to die so that she could use her death in the ritual for Janus to ask for a solution to the black tide, but it was not Janus who answered her. It was Kephale. As of 3.1, we don't know exactly what Kephale told Mortis yet, if that was even truly Kephale, but the gist of the prophecy was told to the audience through Tribbie's nightmare scene. On the screen here is my annotation of Mortis' prophecy in the nightmare sequence, adding additional details that aren't really clear in the English version but are present in the Chinese version. The prophecy reads as such: happiness abound in this lush land by God's chosen. The 12 constellations shine like eyes. Giants raised their glasses in a toast beheld by the 12 constellations. 3 carved the heavens and the earth. 3 wove the threads of fate. 3 molded life with their hands, and 3 guided calamity's gate. They declared the world too unstirring, hence wished endless laughter upon the living. Thus you and I were created, with words and songs to weave, and love and intimacy to give. Thus, creation was complete, who then will bear the weight of humanity's souls, to lighten the steps of the living as a whole? O great Kephale, all-knowing father of stature so tall, yet low does their gaze willingly fall. With light of dawn heavy upon their shoulders, golden blood spills unto the land, converge into a boiling river that flows to the heroic heirs of this world. And then, presumably Oronyx continued, and the nightmare begins. O Janus, please lend me your ears. In the black mist, as death and fate draw close, in the bloodied earth, the dead and living seek the shore. What is this world? It mirrors your maze-like fate. What is this world? A silent lament, without a trace. What is the past? Wandering ghosts that linger. What is the future passage? Alone listening to the living's farewell. Why do we start? Only ruins remain at the end. Why do we end? Only a lonely shadow can be seen. A lonely shadow. Lonely. 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 Hurry. Run. Tribios, run. The black tide has arrived at the city. Presumably, this is when Oronyx died to Reaver in Janusopolis. Back to Mortis, she continued. This is the sacrifice of a holy maiden. You won't make it to the end. Only one person can. Go bid your farewells, Tribios. Time is running out. My sweet girl, I will never leave you. But remember this, Tribios. All shall bid farewell to one, and that person alone will witness the miracle. Only one shall live till the end, and they alone will witness Era Nova. Since your mind is made up, then traverse the black tide and dispel the fog for Amphoreus. I shall see you tomorrow, my dearest Tribios. The devil is in the details, and we will analyze this in more details later in the video. For now, let's just say that up until 3.1 for 1,000 years, Tribios actually never witnessed Kephale's prophecy directly, only through Mortis' guidance from beyond the veil after Mortis' death. Whatever Kephale told Mortis, the spirit of Mortis and Tribios believed that it genuinely contains the solution to the black tides, and to save everyone, Tribios must gather the Chrysos heirs to steal the core flames from the Titans, even if in the end, only one is fated to remain as a lonely shadow. And this action, they believed, would lead everyone on Amphoreus to the land of the West Wind, which is the white shore with no sorrow, the floating island in the sky where Mortis is still waiting for Tribbie. Of course, the astute has probably noticed by now that there are several things wrong with this interpretation of the prophecy, but we will be leaving that for later. For now, on her end, Tribios genuinely believes in the prophecy left behind by Mortis. After her mother's death, Tribios was raised as a bird in a cage, or in this case, a holy maiden in a cage, used mainly as a puppet for the priest to assume authority and as a tourist attraction. Despite her imprisonment, Tribios never gave up on the prophecy Mortis left for her, the prophecy of "see you again." As she grew up, Tribios knew exactly what to do. She approached Oronyx and told Oronyx of her decision to take the core flame. On their part, Oronyx refused to believe that Kephale would tell the humans to kill their own kins and tried to convince Tribios to turn back. However, after years and years of waiting for the right time to enact her mother's prophecy, Tribios was determined. She escaped her gilded jail cell with a secret passage the acolyte built in accordance to Mortis' request. After dodging the guards, Tribios finally made her way to Janus' core flame. But what Janus said had nothing to do with saving humanity from the black tides. The only thing that Janus asked of Tribios was to step forth, and thou shalt bury yourself, bury the gods, and bury the fate that binds us all. Effectively, it was to kill Janus themselves. To that, Tribios only responded, "I've come here to take on your fate." It is here that we were finally shown what taking on the core flame means for the Chrysos heirs. It is to take on the Titans' fate and their death. For Tribios, it is to shatter into 1,000 fragments and wither in the soil of foreign lands. She shall wither, and through that, the dead shall sprout again from something that is censored in the Tribbie myriad. For Mighty Eye, it is to die with a wound in his back. And for Aglaea, it is to have the final bath in warm and radiant gold. Against Tribios' determination, Janus could only respond. Yet, the flame chase is a journey of constant loss, among which even life itself holds little value. Time decays the heart, the passages shatter the body, and the scales weigh the separation, until the end draws near. Overthrow the gods. Return the core flames. Inherit divine authority. Forge godly miracles. Go kill the Titans. Go mourn their fate. Ferry the spirits of the gods. Nourish the land with divine essence. Finally, Janus warned her once more of Kephale's prophecy. All shall bid farewell to one, and that person alone will witness the miracle. Only one shall live till the end, and they alone will witness Era Nova. And throughout all of this, you can distinctively see how the whole floating garden island of the West Wind was mentioned exactly nowhere, and the prophecy, as repeated by both Janus and Mortis, never mentioned anything close to an actual solution to the black tide problem. The Garden of West Wind originated solely from Tribbie's dream, and how Mortis used that dream as an analogy to explain her future death to her daughter. In other words, the Garden of the West Wind, the heavenly floating island where people would go to after the Big Tang reset conducted by the Deliverer, the entire goal of the current Tribbie, does not actually exist in physical form separate from their current life on Amphoreus, and was not part of the original prophecy passed down by both Mortis and Janus. In fact, the prophecy Mortis gave us in the nightmare scene specifically told us that the shore that the dead and the living sought doesn't actually exist. It is only a belief in the end. Of course, it is also in the flashback that we were shown exactly how and why the current Tribbie actually believed the Garden of West Wind part to be part of the prophecy. According to Tribbie, when she took on Janus' core flame, she went through soul and memory fragmentation, turning into the many Tribbie we saw in the myriad. Hence, This is why the current Tribbie had to go revisit the Temple of the Three Fates and ended up getting stabbed by Reaver. She needed to revisit her memory. Even worse, after each usage of the Century Gate, her body and mind shrink, slowly regressing toward infancy. Perhaps this shrinking effect was exactly why Tribbie's fate is described as wither, instead of just die with a wound in your back like Mighty Eye. Wither, as in withering away slowly after every use, not unlike how Rukkhadevata's power operated over in Genshin. And because of this slow regression toward infancy, especially after 998 Tribbie had died, the current Tribbie's minds had effectively regressed to that of a child, the same child who genuinely believed in her mother's promise to reunite at the end in the Garden of West Wind. This is actually especially poignant when we play Simulated Universe, complete the nymph quest in the past map of Janusopolis, and receive more information about the true nature of Janus's passage and about his so-called Garden of the West Wind. In the nymph quest at the new 3.1 map of Janusopolis, after you collect all the butterflies, you can talk to the puppet there to receive hints on how to solve a hidden puzzle. Notably, the hints talked specifically about Tribios as the Holy Maiden and how the path of the world she walks toward was that of the non-existent Nine, as in of Nihility. In addition, in Protean Hero, we are also shown an equation called Passenger of River of Souls, which told us that the invitation to the Garden of the West Wind is nothing more than the murmurs of the dead in the River of Nihility, meant to tempt the living into their realm. It is merely a sweet dream on the verge of death. Leave this place now, lost poet. Do not believe in those whispers and never look back. I believe that with the additional information in Simulated Universe and in the Hidden Nymph quest, it's a reasonably solid guess to say that the prophecy of Janus is nothing more than Nihility's murmur, and the promise of the Garden of the West Wind given to Tribios by Mortis in her dream is nothing more than, well, a temptation from the dead. Because, Mortis literally means death, and she is in fact also dead. Fundamentally, Tribios walking toward the Garden of the West Wind under the lore of Mortis, the dead, is not unlike how, outside of Amphoreus, the sin-thirstus murmur in the Nihility's horizon of existence to tempt people into falling into the abyss. The border of Nihility solely affects its observers. In other words, once an individual has observed the border of Nihility, they cannot stop this behavior and will irreversibly move towards the edge of the border, with no possibility of escape. Scholars intrigued by the Nihility speculate that affected self-annihilators and affected worlds will plunge into the border itself, with their very existence eternally fixed to the other side of the unobservable border, ultimately eradicated from reality. Arcadia doesn't actually exist, after all. Well, actually, yes it does. Amphoreus itself is the Elysium everlasting all of them have been seeking for, but Tribios doesn't know that. And so, light calendar 3760, month of Evernight. Janusopolis Holy Maiden, Tribios bore the core flame to quell the world's chaos and became a demigod of Janus. She traversed the Gate of Infinity, splitting into 1,000 messengers to spread the divine prophecy across the land of Amphoreus. After a century of arduous journeying, light calendar 3870, month of freedom, humanity's flame-chase journey officially began. For context, the current year in Amphoreus is 4931, so it has been 1,000 years since Tribios became a flame chaser. 1,000 years and 998 soul fragments. In 4931, as of 3.1, only 0.2% of the original Tribios' soul and memory was left. On an unrelated note, Janus being a mirror of 9 does make a striking amount of sense when you really think about. 9 is fundamentally a black hole, and the power of passage can be seen as a manifestation of a wormhole, which, in oversimplified terms, is a type of black hole called a Kerr black hole. The general idea is that a rotating or electrically charged Kerr black hole can hypothetically open up tunnels into other universes. Your mileage may vary as to how stable the ensuing Kerr tunnel actually is, but it has been proposed to be the solution to the black hole information paradox created by Hawking radiation. So basically, you can imagine Janus as a rotating Kerr black hole, a subset of the black hole god 9. As a wormhole, it can create passages between universes, or different places in the case of Amphoreus, But this comes at the cost of the Chrysos heir of Janus getting spaghettified over time after every use of the Kerr tunnel, the Century Gate. At the same time, since time slows down near a black hole, her information is torn apart piece by piece over 1,000 years as she slowly falls toward the singularity. In a previous video released back in 2.7, I have speculated that Tribbie is a combination of Janus and Trivia Hecate. Janus is, of course, the Roman two-faced god who represents gates, doorways, and, in the modern day, gay people. Serving a similar function to the Roman god Janus, the Greek Trivia Hecate is the goddess of crossroads, the passage to the underworld, and witchcraft. Specifically, the Trivia form is a syncretized version of Hecate with two other goddesses, who are usually two among Dione, Phoebe, Persephone, Demeter, or Artemis. Together as Trivia, they are the goddess of the moon, with each goddess as a phase of the moon, which is exactly how Hoyoverse writers have used Trivia in Genshin Impact, as can be seen in the Tsurumi murals, which reference the hymn to Diana. Much credit to user Spookyism from the Genshin lore sub from 3 years back for the translation and discovery. Incidentally, Tribios being referred to as saffron by the priests in Saffron's Secret Recipe is also a reference to Hecate, one of whose epithets is saffron-veiled. However, that's not all. With new information from 3.1, we can see more clearly what other inspirations Hoyoverse writers have made use of for Tribbie and Tribios. Firstly, back to Trivia Hecate. While there are many possible combinations for Trivia Hecate, which can include Dione, Phoebe, Persephone, Demeter, or Artemis as the other faces, in Tribbie's specific case, we can map pretty well their names, Tribbie, Trinon, Triane, to Phoebe, Dione, and Diane respectively. For Tribbie, Phoebe, whose name means radiant, clear, or prophecy, is a Titaness associated with the moon through her conflation with Hecate-Trivia. Originally, Phoebe was an oracular goddess ruling over the oracle site of Delphi, alongside the mother goddess Gaia and the goddess of justice Themis. According to Aeschylus, Phoebe gave Delphi to Apollo as a birthday gift, which supposedly is why Apollo is also known as Phoebos. From Homeric Hymn 3 to Delian Apollo, Phoebe is conflated with Dione, who is the grandmother of Apollo and the inspiration for Trinon here. For Trinon, Dione is a little-known goddess in the modern day, but initially, she was originally a consort of Zeus and the mother of Aphrodite. Her name, Dione, is actually a cognate of Zeus, as both originated from Darius, the Indo-European sky father. It is generally assumed that she was essentially the female Zeus and his main consort once upon a time before Hera replaced her role by the classical era. Like Phoebe and Diane, she is an oracular Titaness in charge of the Temple of Dodona and is conflated with Hecate-Trivia later on. Historically, the role of Dione as a sky mother goddess, the divine consort, is presumed to have been mixed with the influence of the Near Eastern Ishtar, as were the other Inanna-Ishtaric spies or Ishtar-influenced love, war, and spring goddess variants in Greek mythology: Phoebe, Artemis, Athena, Nike, Aphrodite Urania, Persephone, Demeter, Pandora, Gaia. Yes, everyone and their mother in Europe and the Middle East is secretly Inanna-Ishtar. If you want to read more about this, the links are in the description. The Sumer Babylonian myths were actually hugely influential to Greco-Roman myths and the development of the Western and Middle Eastern civilizations. I can say for certain that it would be a struggle to understand the underlying themes of Greco-Roman myths without at least a cursory knowledge of Sumer Babylonian myths and the belief system of the Phoenicians, who once upon a time acted as a medium transmitting Near Eastern influences to Europe. Once of such influence was, in fact, the precursor of the alphabet we are currently using now in Latin, in Greek, in English, and a good chunk of other languages. As a result, you can see Inanna-Ishtar, Demusid, Gilgamesh, and Enkidu everywhere you go if you dig deep enough, so I highly recommend you to check out the links below. Anyway, I've been digressing a bit here, but back to the 3 fates in Amphoreus. From the list of oracular Titanesses, I think it's quite easy to see now who are the inspirations for Oronyx, Janus, and Tantalon here. Tantalon is a natural development from Themis, who is also an oracular Titaness while being the goddess of justice. Oronyx is very clearly Mnemosyne through meme and their power of turning back time. while Janus is actually a cover for Hecate-Trivia, who is a combination of Phoebe, Dion, and Diane. Together, Phoebe and Themis Delphi, Dion's Dodona, and Mnemosyne's Trophonius were three important oracle sites in ancient Greek before the classical era. The domain of each of these titans, Justice Tantalon, Time and Memory Oronyx, and Passage Janus, correlate pretty well to Justice Themis, Memory Mnemosyne, and Three-Faced Crossroad Hecate-Trivia, respectively. For Triane, her reference is much easier to guess than Trianon. Her name is an obvious nod to Diane, or Diana, who appeared in Greek mythology as Artemis, the moon goddess of the moon and the hunt. Incidentally, even though she probably started out as a pre-Greek Cretan goddess, over time, Artemis Diana also became an ex-spy of Ishtar, incorporating her aspect as the goddess of the hunt, while Aphrodite got most of the love and lust aspect, and Athena inherited the war aspect. If you play Fate Grand Order, you might have known her as one of the machine titans in Olympus, the Greek lost belt, the setting of which strongly resembles that of Amphoreus, albeit mixed with Babylonia and Fate's Day Night. If you play Honkai 2 and 3, you might have known Diana as Kiana, the goddess of Earth who resides on the moon. If you play Genshin, you might have known her as the Sustainer, who is referred to as Trivia by the ancient Suromi civilization. Historically, Hoyoverse has had a bit of an obsession with Artemis Diana, so it's no surprise that she will be referenced in their games once more. Like Phoebe and Dion, she is sometimes included among the trivia and conflated with Hecate, which is exactly what happened here once more. Interestingly, Diana's name in Latin is cognate with Dion and Zeus, so you can see how the Roman Diana can be considered as another variant of Dion, not unlike how Triane, Tribbie, and Trianon are fundamentally one person, Tribios, the heir with 3 lives. Secondly, like most other Hoyoverse character, Tribbie is a composite of many different myths and stories. Some are gods, some are heroes, and some are constellations, as I have mentioned in a previous video. In 3.0, Hoyoverse confirmed that my gut feeling is, in fact, right, and that the Chrysos heirs and their titans are really a mix and match of various gods, heroes, and constellations. Specifically, the Titans are literally called constellations multiple times by many different characters and the in-game lore books. Back in 3.0, I was in quite a bind for Tribbie because of the lack of information. But now, with new information from 3.1 and from me browsing Ptolemy's constellation list and the Sumerian Babylonian star lists at midnight, I have managed to finally pin down Tribbie's constellation. It's the Triangulum, the triangle. Yes, it's kinda obvious in hindsight, but such is life. Historically, the tradition of astrology in the West has received heavy influence from that of Sumerians and Babylonians, mostly through the intermediary, the Chaldeans. You can see that the correlations between the Sumerian Babylonian astral zodiac and the Greek ones are pretty much the same thing, with only some minor changes to adapt to Greek culture and history. According to Aristotle in On the Heavens, similar accounts of other stars are given by the Egyptians and Babylonians, whose observations have been kept for very many years past, and from whom much of our evidence about particular stars is derived. In particular, in Ptolemy's Almagest, the famed Greek astrologer never shied away from crediting the ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Chaldeans with their extensive contributions to astrology and time division, contributions that he recorded and expanded in the Almagest. And it was through Ptolemy's Almagest that the ancient knowledge of those lost civilizations became the cornerstones for Western astrology, astronomy, and math. If you want to read more about this, you can read more in the links in the description. Anyway, so, of course, to find out the meaning of the Western constellations, we have to start with the Sumerian Babylonian star lists. In the Babylonian 3 stars each list, Mul-Apen is the first constellation on the path of Enlil, the path of the sun in the 45 days on either side of summer solstice. The same constellation appeared as Deltalon in Greek and Triangulum in Latin. In some versions of the myth, Triangulum is associated with the island of Sicily and sometimes imagined as a floating island in heaven. Hence, now you can see why Tribbie had that specific dream about the floating island in the sky, which in Honkai Star Rail became conflated with the Garden of West Wind, also known as the Garden of Hesperides, and the underworld for heroes, the Elysian field. It's actually a reference to Triangulum as a constellation. Furthermore, Initially imagined as the plow of Enlil, the Mul-Apin is also associated with Enlil himself, who ruled over the air and was the god to give the warning of the incoming great flood to humanity in the Eridu Genesis. However, in the Babylonian flood myth, Enlil was the cause of the flood himself. Hence, this is why Janus and Kephale's prophecies all sound a bit dodgy when you inspect them in closer details, and why the cause of the black tide, the flood equivalents here to the flood myth recorded in the Eridu Genesis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, may or may not have been caused by some issues on Kephale's and Janus' end. Either way, after the prototype Noah, Ziusidra, survived the flood, he was rewarded immortality by Enlil via an eternal breath. In the case of Amphoreus, that reward of immortality directly correlates with Tribios' floating island of the Garden of West Wind and Aglaea's narration in Golden Epic. I gaze towards the distant future, where the sun shall etch the footprints of humanity. But that's not all. Like most other Hoyoverse characters, Tribbie is not only a massive mix and match of many gods from Greco-Roman myths and Sumer-Babylonian myths, her story plot, lore, and designs also have a bunch of heroes rolled in. The first one that is easiest to guess would be Cassandra, the famous princess Oracle of Troy. Usually depicted with auburn hair, Cassandra was the Trojan princess who was the lover of Apollo and received the gift of Oracle from him. However, after receiving the gift, Cassandra went back on her words and rejected Apollo, who ended up cursing her to never be believed by anyone else, even though her prophecies were true. During the Trojan War, she tried to warn her family against accepting Helen into their family, but she was not believed by her family. Consequently, she was considered a madwoman and was locked up by her father, King Priam, up until the fall of Troy. Virgil later added an additional act to her role. During the war itself, she tried to warn the Trojans of the Trojan horse trick, which also appeared as Janus did in-game. She was not believed once more. At the end of the war, she was kidnapped by Agamemnon and killed by his wife Clytemnestra. Thus, the trope Cassandra Truth was born. Fittingly, Tribios and Mortis prophecy was not believed either. After her escape from Troy Janiosopolis, she was killed multiple times by the other city-states' powerful rulers, who were more interested in waging wars against each other than banding together to fight against the Black Tides. It wasn't until Story 2, when she returned to Janiosopolis, that she was believed again. Or not, because like the story of Cassandra being locked up by King Priam, she was also locked up by the king of Janiosopolis once more before she could escape, albeit with a heavy price and how many pieces of her had to die for it. The pain inflicted was many times greater than usual. This spring, most of us remain forever in the wilds where flowers have yet to bloom. We don't know what happened immediately after character story 2, but at an indeterminate point in time, Janiosopolis came under the rule of Empress Cerydra, who ordered the Janus steed, the equivalent of the Trojan horse here, to be made. Instead of becoming tools for infiltration like in the real-life Trojan War story, the Janus steeds were means of communications between the city-states so that they could actually band together to fight against the Black Tides. Of course, not all city-states followed Empress Cerydra and Tribios' proposal. Castrum Cremnos, the Grove of Epiphany, Dolos, and Styxia all objected to the alliance up until the current timeline 1,000 years later. But at the end, Tribios, now Tribbie with only 0.2% of her soul and memory remaining, moved to Okima and met the young Aglaea. In the current timeline, they actually still struggled to make the Elder Council believe in the prophecy, but that's probably because it does sound a bit dubious when you look too closely at it. Thus, in a tragic development, Aglaea and Tribbie started to lie about the true nature of the prophecy. While the actual prophecy itself as shown to us by Mortis is dubious enough, in 3.0, Aglaea and Tribbie went on to censor the ending of the prophecy, pretending that the Garden of the West Wind isn't actually death, the other shore of the Styx, and cutting out the part where every Chrysos heir is supposed to die aside from the lonely deliverer, who would actually be the one to tang and restart Amphoreus' loop. And it is this lie that will lead to the MC trying out the slot for Oronyx's heir, not knowing that all the heirs aside from the deliverer are supposed to die at the end. Not only that, Phanon doesn't seem like he knows the fated ending of that prophecy either, because as of 3.1, he's still confused and doesn't seem to realize that only the deliverer will remain. As a whole, you can say that they're covering the prophecy with a layer of romanticism to make a dubious ending into a happy end, which was not unlike how Elysian realm went. Regardless, from Cassandra's story, the archetype of Cassandra's Truth was born. But she was not the only oracle used by Hoyoverse to make Tribios. There is also the Cumaen Sibyl, whose myth shares many features of Cassandra's story but, at the same time, has undergone significantly divergent development over her long history. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses and Virgil's The Golden Bough, the Cumaen Sibyl was also a lover of Apollo like Cassandra, and like Cassandra, after receiving the gift from Apollo, she also rejected him. However, her gift was different from Cassandra. While Cassandra asked for the gift of prophecy, the Cumaen Sibyl asked for immortality. So needless to say, she never dies like Cassandra, and therein lies the problem. When the Cumaen Sibyl asked for immortality, she forgot to ask for eternal youth to go with it. So she kept aging and aging and aging, forever, until she became gray and decrepit. In her old age, the Cumaen Sibyl lives in a cave, guarding the entrance to the underworld. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, she acted as a guide for the main character in the underworld, leading him to Hera Juno's golden bough, which allowed him to safely journey in the underworld and saw his ancestors once more. Over time, the same story written down by Ovid received further development. In medieval Europe, the cave where the Cumaen Sibyl stayed became known as Sibylla's Cave of the Apennine Tribbie, who has the exact same background as the Cumaen Sibyl. Supposedly, the cave is in Mani Vetor, but instead of being a cave that leads to the underworld, it's now a cave that leads to the Elysian field, a paradise where the riches abound in pleasant gardens. Of course, this Elysian field is fundamentally just another version of the underworld, for in Greek mythologies, Elysium is the place where heroes go to after death. However, there is another interpretation of Ovid's story about the Cumaen Sibyl, and it is found in Satyricon. In the Satyricon, in her old age, the Cumaen Sibyl hangs in an ampulla, which can be alternatively translated as cave, as in Sibylla's cave, or jar, like ampulla's Greek origin as amphora. Instead of getting gray and decrepit without eternal youth, the Cumaen Sibyl in Satyricon shrinks in her old age, becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, until she's nothing more than a tourist attraction, longing to die. "Sibyl, what do you want?" she answered. "I want to die." Now, for Aventurin fans, you probably find this entire plot sounds strikingly familiar. That's right, Aventurin is actually also a reference to the Cumaen Sibyl, more specifically, the Satyricon version of Cumaen Sibyl. One of the achievements you get from completing his story arc in the Penacony main quest is a direct quote of Sibyl's lines in Satyricon. "Sibyl, what do you want?" She answered, "I want to die." Furthermore, you can also see how the plot of the Cumaen Sibyl slowly shrinking is reflected in Aventurin's own confrontation with his child self, who fundamentally only wanted to meet his family again. And now, in Amphoreus, you can see the exact same plot, copied and pasted, being used for Tribios. Like the Cumaen Sibyl in Satyricon and like Aventurin, she also shrinks as she gets older due to the fate of Janus she took on, only that her case is more literally, because Janus's century gate literally regresses her mind and body after every use. Like the Satyricon Tribbie, she hangs in a jar, although in this case, the ampulla called Sibylla's Cave is called Amphoreus, which, incidentally, works perfectly with Plato's allegory of the cave that the game has already directly stated to be Amphoreus. Entirely like Aventurin, the young child version of Tribios, Tribbie, only fundamentally wants to see her dead family again, and entirely like Aventurin, she falls for the murmurs of nihility in trying to chase that dream of the floating island called Elysian Field at the end of the West Wind, heedless of the fact that that garden is nothing more than the temptation of nihility, luring her to the underworld. If you play Genshin, a comparison here can also be made to Sibylla, who is a Seal Eye Angel in Remuria plotline. As the only survivor of a dead civilization, the Golden Bee Sibylla had long lost her original form and mind, but she could still see the future and gave Remus the prophecy of his future with the Remurian Empire. Under her advice, Remus created his empire in Fontaine and constructed golems made of clay and dragons ichor. At the end of the plan, every mind in Remuria was supposed to be merged together with Sibylla to create a collective consciousness, Phobos, which would carry on the Remuria civilization as the only human left. Of course, Remus and Cyclad changed their minds at the finale of the symphony, which led to Remus' self-destruction to prevent the final tang of all minds in Fontaine to the Symphony of Phobos. In Amphoreus, you just need to replace Remus with Phaenon and Tribios with Sibylla to get a gist on how blatantly bogus the prophecy she believes in is. Heartbreaking backstory be damned. Fundamentally, the prophecy is nothing more than a belief and most definitely is not an evidence-based solution to the Black Tide's problem at all. At its core, it is the murmurs of nihility luring the living into the river of death. It is the wish of Tribios to end all sufferings and meet her mother once more. So basically, the exact same wish as that of Aventurine and the Cumaen Sibyl. However, there is another side to the Tribios character outside of her death wish, and that lies with T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. For context, Hoyoverse writers really love The Wasteland and have repeatedly quoted that poem for many different characters and world building. The line about the Cumaen Sibyl in Satyricon that acts as the inspirations for Aventurine and Tribios is also in The Wasteland. Meanwhile, the reference for Isolde and Tristan in The Wasteland was used as the name of one of Sunday's leitmotifs. In addition, Hyacinth Girl of T.S. Eliot appeared as a literally Hyacinth the Girl in Amphoreus, and the hanged man fearing death by water is for Bas, who literally died in the water, and is just Phlebas, the name of Adonis demused Jesus Christ in The Wasteland. So yeah, needless to say, a good chunk of Honkai Star Rail lore took inspiration from The Wasteland. With how important The Wasteland is to the game's lore, I think it is worth looking at how Satyricon Cumaen Sibyl was used by T.S. Eliot. Specifically, it was right at the beginning of the poem in the first section called Burial of the Dead. Throughout the poem, the author created an audience and author surrogate in Tiresias. Tiresias is another dead prophet in the underworld, and in the poem, he acts as a guide for the readers to understand what happened to Europe after World War I. In T.S. Eliot's view, after World War I, Europe has become a shattered landscape mired in the dead and the living dead, having lost whatever idealism they were supposed to have back in the ideal past of the Romantic genre. Burial of the Dead describes the scenery in winter, and Sibyl over here represents Europe, wishing to die to end her suffering. However, as the poem progresses, the other prophet in the poem, Tiresias, guides humans to a new spring. After the war, nature is fragmented, and humans are fragmented too. But at the end, once the dead have been buried, spring will sprout once more, which, incidentally, is part of Tribios' fate given to her by Janus and her myriad. You shall wither, and through that, the dead shall sprout again. So, what does this mean? Well, you can interpret the poem and Janus' prophecy in many ways. From a romantic point of view, it is an ending of hope despite how the journey has a high chance of failure, or in the case of Elysian realm, has a 100% chance of everyone dying. From the rational point of view, it is pure copium hiding away the unhappy ending of everyone dying because, in fact, all of them are already fated to die. Well, except Phaenon. Since Amphoreus is a romantic story, they're probably going for the romantic interpretation again, like in Elysian realm. But fundamentally, regardless of how you think of Tribios' prophecy, it is fundamentally a representation of her hope. It is her death wish, yes, but at the same time, she also genuinely believes that this romantic ending of an Elysian field at the end of the West Wind is the only hope for Amphoreus, even if it's not substantiated by anything more than her feelings, just like Elysian realm over in Honkai 3. And, of course, it is, once again, the theme of the denial of will to live. From Tribios, and from Alicia's point of view, choosing to die for the slime chance of hope becoming true is better than being ruled by the will to live and living eternally in the nihilism of the black tides. Flame Chase is a journey of constant loss, but as long as they have hope against nihilism, they would have etched their existence into history, and that's enough for them. I have already talked about this topic back in 2.7 for Elysian Realm, and how Amphoreus could have used the same theme. So, if you're interested, you can check out that video in the description. But if denial of the will to live is Tribios' theme, then what is the wish of Janus and Kephale? Why did they give the prophecy to Mortis in the first place? Well, it's because they want to die. While the Satyricon Sibyl in an ampulla is famous in the modern day for its quotation in the wasteland, the reference was reasonably popular in the past and has inspired many different authors throughout the age, among which are Asimov, Hoyoverse's favorite science fiction writer. Now, fans of Hoyo lores would probably find Asimov's writings quite familiar. Specifically, the idea of the Honkai as the collective consciousness seeking to absorb more people into its group came from Evangelion's collective consciousness, which took that idea from Jungian psychology and from Asimov's Gaia planet in the Foundation series. In addition, several ideas used specifically for Elysian Realm were taken not only from Faust but also from Asimov's The End of Eternity. Namely, the plots around Noise Lambent was split between Alicia and her share of corruption. Harlan the technician who hid away Lambent in a temporal block is Vilvi the resident technician with her backdoors, and the ending of Elysian Realm is pretty much one-to-one to the Eternals getting deleted, so that the future of infinity could come. Similarly, in Honkai Star Rail, the entire concept of Nous is a reference to Asimov's Multivac in The Last Question, which is an all-powerful supercomputer that's supposed to find the answer to the question of how to revert entropy. There was even a parody of the punchline for The Last Question in Unknowable Domain. For more details on that, you can check out my news video linked in the description. Anyway, but the story of Multivac doesn't just go straight from creation to revelation, the moment it finally worked out the answer after all of humanity's minds had merged into it. In all the troubles of the world, Multivac, the supercomputer of humanity, is used as a prophet to solve all the troubles of the world. It would predict future crimes, and the law enforcement would make preemptive arrest before the crime could occur. Well, yes, that's Psycho-Pass's premise, the prediction system of which is named Sibyl. Pretty on the nose if you ask me, since that's the punchline of all the troubles of the world. In The Last Question, Multivac would end up becoming the god of creation of the new universe, so its credential is pretty well proven by the lore. One day, however, Multivac gave out a prediction accusing a man, Joseph, of a murder. Ben, Joseph's son, sought out help from Multivac on how to free his father. Multivac gave him a list of instructions, and this prediction led to a chain of events that ended up with Ben closing the circuit of Multivac and taking it out of commission for months. At the end, it was revealed that the prophecy was a lie all along. Othman used the instrument on Gulliman's desk. His fingers punched out the question with deft strokes. Multivac, what do you yourself want more than anything else? The moment between question and answer lengthened unbearably, but neither Othman nor Gulliman breathed. And there was a clicking and a card popped out. It was a small card. On it, in precise letters, was the answer. I want to die. So yeah, Multivac, the future god who would tang the last of humanity and who would become the new god of creation of humanity in the future of The Last Question, made it all up because it wanted to die, tired of its job of being humanity's prophet and god. About this ending, Asimov commented this in a magazine. I knew of a touching story told of an old Sibyl, and it sounded good to me. I made the story much longer, much more intricate, much more modern, of course, but I led up to a final punchline, and that punchline is exactly the one found in the ancient tale. From this, it is quite easy to see that he's talking about the Cumaen Sibyl in the Satyricon, which is why Psycho-Pass named their crime predictive system Sibyl. Pretty similar themes in the ending too, from the look of it, just from an alternate timeline. And of course, when you take a look at this story from the lens of the giant Prometheus Atlas guy, Kephale, carrying the sky as a punishment for eternity in the Garden of Hesperides, forever bleeding golden blood from an unhealable wound, but touted as the creator god by the humans below, you can start to see where this is going with Kephale's prophecy. Fundamentally, like Janus, Kephale wanted to die, so that they would be free from Amphoreus, the underworld, yet also the Garden of Hesperides. They have been stuck in for eternity. In Golden Scapegoat, We already know that the scapegoat wants to die, very much to escape the fate of eternally being sacrificed to itself. So it is pretty much par for the course when you consider that Atlas and Prometheus' entire plotline in both Greek myths and in Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound is pretty much their suffering and how much they want to seek freedom. And specifically for Atlas, this is the freedom that comes from foisting off his responsibility to Heracles. Hence, why in Protean Hero, we have this illuminating lore about the Dawn Troop and Corinthi. Back during the start of Tribios' journey to recruit people to the Flame Chase journey, she was supported by the Empress Cerydra, who sent Janus steeds to other cities for an alliance. They managed to find the first generation of Chrysos heirs who would inherit the golden blood, and it is this first generation that is referred to as Dawn Troop in the simulated universe equation. Among the Dawn Troop, the heir for the world-bearing throne of Kephale, the hero Corinthi, is said to have strangled a snake with his bare hand as a child, drank with the gods of the seas, wrestled with their creations, ascended the sacred mountain, and won all the honors a hero could ask for. Well, yes, that's Heracles. But at the end of the journey, he returned to a destroyed homeland. Wishing to perish in his most glorious moments, Corinthi prayed to the gods and was lifted up into the sky by the passage of time to become a constellation. But in the Dawn Trope equation, the narrator stated that they could still see the Dawn Troop in their dream, where they don the mask of Kephale, playing as the god that upholds the world. From this, we can kind of guess that the first generation of Chrysos heirs, more specifically Corinthi the Heracles, already succeeded in becoming the new Kephale. However, when combined with the golden scapegoat's muttering and the end result of how the black tides are still around and going strong, it's pretty safe to say that Corinthi the Heracles presumably took on Atlas Kephale's job of holding up the sky right then and there. But like the original Kephale who gave out the prophecy to Mortis, he likely got tired of the endless suffering and started to wish for death, which may or may not have caused the black tides in the first place. When Corinthi was replaced by whoever was the guy after him for the Kephale slot, and the guy after that, and the guy after, they all ended up with the same mentality as Multivac and Cumaen Sibyl, eventually leading the chain to the current Deliverer Core Flame holder, Reaver Phanon of the previous loop. And fundamentally, I think it's quite probably to assume that all of these world-bearing Core Flame holders had the same wish, like Multivac in all the troubles of the world. They wanted to die. Thus they gave out the prophecy to Mortis, who started the chain of events that would lead to their own death, ending their eternal suffering. However, if you're a romantic like Alicia and Cyrene, the denial of will to live is not the end, it is only the new beginning for Amphoreus, for the Titans, and for Tribios as well. In Chinese, Tribios' name is Sibylla, which sounds strikingly like Tiresias, another famous Greek oracle referenced by T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. In Apollodorus, Tiresias was originally a youth who happened to see Athena's naked body when she was bathing in a spring. In dismay, Athena punished him with blindness, for he had seen the secrets of the gods. In exchange, she gifted him with the gift of prophecy and divination. Throughout his long life, Tiresias has tried to prevent many tragedies, and in his death, he still has his gift of prophecy. In the Odyssey, as a spirit in the underworld, Tiresias was summoned by the sacrifice of a black sheep and gave guidance to Odyssey. And it is because of this story that he was chosen to be the central character of The Wasteland. With his gender-fluid nature from his swapping between a man and a woman, Tiresias in The Wasteland represents the humans caught between the destruction of war and the reconstruction of peace. At the same time, Tiresias is the prophet, guiding the living dead of the fractured winter landscape to the new spring. Citing Fraser's Golden Bough, which was a comparative mythology work on the dying and reviving god archetype and related fertility rites, T.S. Eliot has transformed humanity in his poem into Demusit, the dying and reviving god of Sumerian myths, the first golden scapegoat of human civilization, and the god of spring and rebirth. Thus, you shall wither, and through that, the dead shall sprout again. In Apollodorus, Tiresias lost his eyesights and gained his foresights in spring, and at the end, he also died to the spring water, completing the cycle. But what is the spring water here for Tribios? If you happen to encounter someone burdened with branch-like protrusions, do not approach rashly. The strange disease known as the withering curse is rampant in the city of Raelvis. Some say the afflicted have received enlightenment from Circes, while others claim it as a miracle of Thanatos. Yet, the sufferers neither speak the truth nor show signs of life ebbing away. They merely gravitate towards each other, like withered trees seeking to form a forest. No one can understand the whispers of the patients, just as no one can comprehend the murmurs of the forest breeze. You shall shatter into pieces and wither in the soil of foreign lands. And through that, the dead shall sprout again. All shall bid farewell to one, and that person alone will witness the miracles.